Ah, the French, a nation of aviation pioneers. Louis Bleriot, Henri Farman, Gabriel Voisin, Edouard Newport, and many more whose names I will equally butcher with my atrocious pronunciation. But when it comes to aviation, the French aren't just famous for their pioneering inventors, no. They are equally well known in the aviation community for producing some of the strangest, most perplexing, deeply questionable, and the most unapologetically French designs imaginable. And that is the purpose of today's video. We're not going to look at their best designs. We don't care if a design was good or bad, a success or a failure. We want to find their ugliest examples. We don't want beauty. We want a plane that looks like it was shaped with nothing more than the hardened edge of a stale baguette. So, join me and mentally prepare yourself as we look at what I think to be the top 10 ugliest aircraft France has ever made. In 10th place, we have an aircraft that looks as equally beautiful as it was hideous, and this was the Leduc 022. This was an attempt at developing an interceptor aircraft that was powered by a ramjet, and it was a perfect example of an aircraft being designed with total priority placed on the engine. The best example of this was the location of the pilots. They were placed in the ram part of the ramjet, the cone directly in front of the engine. Now, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't feel comfortable if my cockpit formed part of the literal air intake of my aircraft, especially as the whole thing had to be explosively ejected in an emergency. The position of the cockpit also restricted the pilot's vision, courtesy of the steel nose cone in front of their face. Because of this, a periscope had to be used during takeoff and landing. So, you're sitting in a flying dustbin, unable to see directly in front of you, dwarfed by the intake of the roaring engine behind you, and if something went wrong, you were violently ejected in a plexiglass prison. Small wonder that, though innovative, the design of the 022 didn't catch on. Coming in at number 9, we have the Breguet 1050 Alizé. This chunky thing was operated as a carrier-based anti-submarine aircraft by the French Navy. Now at first glance this may look like a Frenchified version of the Fairey Gannet, but this was in fact independently developed from the prototype Breguet 960 Vulture. With a thick-set fuselage, stubby wings with protruding nacelles, and a tail fin large enough to have its own postcode, the Alizé didn't have the most flattering proportions, and with a single turboprop engine it wasn't going to break any speed records either. Though it was wanting in looks, the Alizé was remarkably successful. First flown in 1956, this aircraft saw service for a remarkable amount of time, not being retired until the year 2000 after 44 years of active duty. Most were operated by France, but at least 12 saw service and action with the Indian Navy as well. They proved to be popular with their crews, and with a combat-loaded range of 1,800 miles, carrying bombs, depth charges, unguided rockets, or various selections of missiles, they were a potent addition to any fleet, even if they were a bit on the slow side. Up next, we have the Amiot 143, proof that even a greenhouse can fly. Designed to specifications drawn up in 1928, which apparently included the requirement to strap a small house onto the underbelly, this aircraft did not enter full service until 1935, when it was already obsolete. The 143 represented a period of French bomber design when gondola-style cabins were in vogue. The gondola design made sense in some ways. It provided excellent visibility for both the bombardier and the defensive gunners, which would increase the aircraft's effectiveness, and it also made it easier for the pilot to navigate. However, suspending your crew in an exposed, unarmoured glass box flying above enemy territory didn't invite much confidence for the survival of said crew, and it also had the aerodynamic properties of a brick. All that being said, the French built 138 of these monstrosities, and they even saw service during the Second World War. Many were flown on night missions during the Battle of France, being sent mostly to attack German airfields behind the front line, and some were used in French territories in northern Africa. Despite having a slow top speed of just 295 km an hour, the 143 didn't suffer the catastrophic losses one would expect, as they were often used at night and away from areas of enemy fighter activity, no doubt to the relief of both sides. Up next, we have the Sud-Est SE 100. This aircraft was an oddity in many ways. Not only did it look like a flying croissant that had a set of wings bolted onto it, it also featured an insanely potent armament for the time and a very strange undercarriage. It had a single large landing wheel under the nose, and 2 more were installed at the rear beneath the tail fins. Usually, this layout would prevent the aircraft from taking off, as neither part of the undercarriage was situated around the centre of gravity, but the SE-100 was designed to sit at a sharp angle of attack to facilitate takeoff. Once it did get airborne, the 100 could bring some heavy weapons to bear on its enemies. The prototype was designed to be equipped with 4 20mm Hispano cannons as offensive weapons, and a 5th was installed in the rear as a defensive gun. Plans were also in place for a later production model to have 6 20mm cannons in the nose, 2 in the rear, and 2 more under the fuselage. For a design planned to enter service in 1940, this was a considerable amount of firepower. The SE-100 was slated to enter mass production. Unfortunately, the fall of France curtailed this. Had it seen full service, it could have been an excellent multi-purpose weapon, physically powerful, and psychologically horrifying. During the interwar period, France, like many other countries, got involved with the design and production of flying boats. Some of them were big, beautiful, and graceful machines, a glowing example of French elegance and refined taste. The Loire 130 was not a glowing example of elegance. It was a squat, thick-set, flat-faced design that, when looked from the side, had a face that vaguely resembled that of a hognose snake. Except that the hognose is undeniably adorable, whereas the Loire 130 is psychologically terrifying. Built as a reconnaissance seaplane, the 130s served aboard most French capital ships by the end of the 1930s. Though they were unpleasant to look at, the Loire 130s proved to be reliable aircraft. They were deployed in some of the most remote theatres of the Second World War, and they had the confusing distinction of serving on both sides, often at the same time and in the same operational theatres. Unfortunately, the requirement for shipboard use limited their total weight, and thus the reinforcements of the airframe. In consequence of this, at least 20 aircraft would be lost due to structural failures, which sometimes caused the 130 to literally split in half when landing on the open sea. Coming in at number 5 is the Sud-Ouest Grognard, which when viewed from the side looks like, well, this. Though it was the aerial equivalent of the Hunchback of Notre Dame, the Grognard did have reasons for its weirdness. Like the English Electric Lightning, the Grognard was powered by 2 jet engines stacked on top of one another. This was useful as it kept the thrust line in the middle of the aircraft, even with the loss of one engine, but it led to the curious placement of the air intake that makes its fuselage design so recognisable. The Grognard made use of several innovative design features. It was the first French aircraft to use drogue chutes when landing. It was the first French aircraft to have both swept wings and leading-edge flaps, and it was the first French aircraft to use so-called elbow controls, with the flight stick being set to one side rather than being placed in the centre of the cockpit. But despite being a cutting-edge design in almost all aspects, looks included, the Grognard program was cancelled in favour of the more traditional Vautour. Coming in 4th place, just missing out on a podium finish, we have the extra-thick Bleriot 125. Did it look like a plane carrying 2 sperm whales under its wings? Yes. Did it also have the flying characteristics of a plane carrying 2 sperm whales under its wings? Oh, most assuredly. Designed in the early 1930s, this was an attempt at reinventing the design of commercial aircraft, and quite frankly, it looked like somebody took a flying boat and just stuck a couple of wheels on it. Built to accommodate 12 passengers in a bulbous twin fuselage, the 125 was offered as a sleek alternative to the blocky designs that had dominated the 1920s. Passengers had the opulent luxury of cushioned wicker chairs, and the pilots sat in a cabin that was sandwiched between the two push-pull engines that forced this curvaceous machine into the air. Unsurprisingly, only one of these unusual aircraft were built, and it handled so poorly that even after 3 years of constant testing and tweaking, it still failed to receive its flight safety certificate, and thus it was scrapped in 1934. In third place, we have the Arsenal Delanne 10, which was apparently built on the assumption that French pilots had the superhuman ability to see through solid metal. Designed by Maurice Delanne, it was an example of tandem wing design. One pair of wings was installed in a high-mounted gull wing configuration at the centre of the fuselage, and the other was installed at the tail. This was also where the two-man cockpit was placed, which meant that the pilot had about 5.5 meters of fuselage, engine, and wings in front of him, which would have made takeoff and landing fun. The rear gunner, on the other hand, had perfect visibility. All he had to do was point his weapon in the right direction and pray that his half-blind pilot didn't send them into a grove of trees. Like many French designs of the late 1930s, early 1940s, the Second World War curtailed its development. The sole example was captured by the Germans, who then completed its construction and took it back to Germany for testing. However, no use appears to have been found for it, as no further examples were ever built. Coming in for second place, we have the ghastly and questionably designed Potez 75. With an open cockpit, a fixed landing gear, and a 640 horsepower V8 engine, you'd be forgiven for thinking this was a design from the late 1920s or early 1930s. But no, this was built in 1953. It was designed to be a low-cost ground support aircraft, and its designers apparently believed it should also perform the role of psychological warfare. With 4 7.5mm guns in the nose, and the capacity to carry bombs or wire-guided anti-tank missiles, this poor man's A-10 was hoped to be a cost-effective solution for the support needs of France's colonial air units. However, the Potez 75 was a complete flop. Not only did it prove to be a poor platform for the Nord SS-10 anti-tank missile, but with a top speed of just 275 km an hour in the mid-1950s, it was about as vulnerable to destruction as the current French defense budget, which, as it turned out, was very vulnerable. Somehow an order had been placed for 150 Potez 75s, but this was cancelled when the new administration took a guillotine to the defense budget, and the single Potez 75 was scrapped in 1958. And finally, in first place, we have a quintessential example of French aviation design from the interwar period. In the 1920s, the Farman brothers designed a multiplicity of curious-looking aircraft. Some were almost normal in appearance, some made you wonder if their drafting office also doubled as a wine cellar, and some had the wonderful combination of being abominably ugly and surprisingly successful. The 3-engine, box-like, thick-winged, and ludicrously proportioned Farman F-120 was one of the latter, and its appalling looks are why it takes the #1 spot in today's video. It was named the Jabiru after a species of Central and South American stork, and I think, had said stork known about its metallic cousin, it would no doubt have been rather offended. The F-120 was in fact the first of several derivatives of a singular design that was drawn up in the early 1920s. Not all of them were as ugly as this initial variant, but in general they all resembled something not unlike a flying drinks cabinet. First flown in 1923, this aircraft was the result of a desire to build a compact but reliable transport, and one that might also find use as a bomber as well. In pursuit of improvement, several different designs were iterated throughout the 1920s, and although it looked about as appealing as a mouldy piece of brie, a few of them found some local success as airliners. Capable of carrying 9 passengers in the luxury of a stout cabin, well equipped with wicker chairs that offered the same level of suggestive safety as the Belgium section of the Maginot Line, the Jabirus flew air routes in both France and Denmark. Unfortunately, this commercial enterprise was limited to just 4 aircraft. Other more modern designs were already making an appearance, and the Jabiru only saw active service for about 5 or 6 years. However, during that time, it attracted much attention, and most of this was certainly attributed to its bulky appearance. Now, if you want to learn more about the aircraft covered in today's video, fear not. I plan to cover most of these in their own videos in the not too distant future, the translation of source material pending, but for now, that does conclude my look at 10 of the ugliest French aircraft ever made. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and a big thank you of course to the patrons, whose names you'll see on the screen here, and a big thank you as well to the members of my Discord server who helped me sift through the large numbers of unique and terrifying French aircraft to make the list for today's video. And of course, I can't forget our Wing Commander tier patrons, the highest tier members of this special group, whose support during the past few months has been absolutely amazing. Thank you all so much for your continued support, and I'll catch you all next time. Goodbye.